They locked her in a cage for being barren. One man dared to set her free. The searing heat of the western sun baked the dusty square where an iron cage stood tall under the hard stares of strangers. A lone rancher strode in, broad-shouldered, silent, two young girls at his side. He stopped before that cage where a barren woman sat, wrists bruised, eyes hollow but unbroken. Here the law saves no one. Only the courage to break invisible chains means a chance at freedom. The sun bore down like judgment on the high plain, flattening every color to shades of dust and bone. In the center of Mesquite Crossing, iron bars caught the glare and threw it back at the faces gathered round. A rough clutch of men and women, boots powdered with red earth, eyes averted from the cage but never truly looking away. Heat waves shimmered over the broken boards of the old mercantile porch. Somewhere in the distance a church bell rang once, just once, off key, then was gone like a mercy withheld. Boone Calder drove his buckboard slow down the main street, reins loose in hands calloused from years of branding stock and splitting rails. The wagon groaned beneath the weight of two little girls. June, sharp-eyed and silent at 9, her braids unraveling in the wind. Wren, 6, clutching the hem of her sister's dress with one hand and a cracked clay doll with the other. They needed salt and a box of cartridges, and Boone would have just as soon come at dawn and left by noon. No time for staring or stories. But the town had other plans that day. He saw the cage before he saw the sign nailed above it. Barren, scrawled in thick black paint. The woman inside was no older than 30. Dirt streaked her bare legs and arms. Her hair, brown and matted, clung to the sweat on her neck. Around her wrists, bruises bloomed, purple, yellow, old and new. Like fruit gone bad, she sat with her knees hugged to her chest, eyes pointed at nothing, lips white with thirst. There was a crowd, not big, but wide enough that nobody had to stand too close. Nobody had to answer for what was happening. The sheriff's deputy leaned against the post office wall, thumbs hooked in his belt, the town's only iron key glinting dull on his hip. Boone stopped the team beside the water trough. For a moment, the world held its breath. June leaned forward, voice like dust on gravel. "Daddy, why is she in there?" Boone didn't answer. He stepped off the wagon, boots thudding hard against the packed earth. No one called his name. Nobody greeted him. But faces shifted. Men leaned back into the shadow. Women pressed children behind their skirts. Boone Calder was not a man to trifle with. His eyes, once bright as new steel, had faded to gunmetal in the years since Anna died. Some said he'd never been the same. Some said he'd grown mean. The truth, he carried more silence than words. He walked to the cage and looked at the woman, taking in the shape of her, the ruin and the will that kept her sitting upright. She didn't flinch as he studied her. Instead, after a long moment, she raised her chin, and her eyes, gray as the bottom of a storm cloud, met his. It was the kind of look that begged for neither rescue nor pity, only truth. A voice broke the moment. "Afternoon, mister. New in town?" It was Whit Barnes, the storekeeper, his red hair wild under a battered hat. He sidled up, too cheerful by half. "You looking for supplies or just a little bit of frontier justice?" Boone barely looked at him. "Why's she in there?" Whit shrugged. "Town rules. She was married 5 years to Caleb Thorne, never bore him a child. The council said that made her a bad sign, unlucky. Couldn't keep her, couldn't turn her loose, so—" He gestured at the cage. "She's a warning now, that's all." "She ain't livestock," Boone said, voice flat as the mesa. The air seemed to still. Whit tried to chuckle, but it curdled in his throat. June, left behind at the wagon, slid off the seat and stood at the wheel, watching Boone with wide, unblinking eyes. Wren clung to her side, silent as dusk. Her name? Boone asked, still staring at the woman. Wit shrugged. Folks call her Lydia, don't say much, and it's not likely she'll start now. Boone looked again at Lydia, at the way her fingers curled around the bars, knuckles white, but no tremble in them. He felt something shift in him, old anger maybe, or just the stubborn refusal to let a thing stand because it was easier than breaking it. Without another word, Boone turned on his heel, boots kicking up a trail of red dust, and walked back to his girls. He lifted both into the wagon, handed them the canteen, and pointed them to the shade of the buckboard canvas. The town watched. Wit watched. Lydia watched, her eyes on Boone now, following him through the sunlight. Boone pushed open the mercantile door and bought what he needed. Flour, salt, a coil of rope, a tin of coffee. He paid in silver dollars, no words wasted. As he turned to leave, he stopped. You got a hacksaw, Wit? The storekeeper hesitated. Maybe. Put it on my bill, Boone said. He took the saw, tucked it into his coat, and strode out. The air was thicker now, the townsfolk whispering, shifting in their boots. He didn't look back, not yet. But the sound of the cage, the clink of iron, the breath drawn and held, followed him all the way down the street, into the space behind his ribs, into the place where grief and rage kept house together. Behind him, June whispered, Daddy, what's gonna happen? Boone set his jaw, eyes on the horizon where the sagebrush met the sky. We'll see, honey, we'll see. The sun had crept a little lower, turning the sky above Mesquite Crossing the color of an old bruise. Boone Calder loaded his girls back onto the wagon, the air thick with a silence that pressed against every chest on Main Street. He tied the sacks down tight, eyes never straying far from the iron cage. The townsfolk had scattered now, some into shade, some into shops, but all kept watch in their own quiet way. Boone made his way toward the blacksmith's, Owen Black, a man whose face was a map of lost fights and hard winters. Boone leaned against the split log rail, watching the man hammer a shoe to a stubborn bay. Got a mind to ask you something, Owen. The blacksmith paused, sweat shining on his brow. That right? That lock on the cage, how tough? Owen didn't look up. He kept working the hot iron, each strike a word unspoken. Tough enough to keep most out unless you got a reason. Maybe I do. Boone's voice was even, no threat, no plea. Owen set the horseshoe down, wiped his hands. Don't, cowboy, some things get you burned around here. He slid a hacksaw off his workbench, almost careless. If you take it, don't bring it back. Boone nodded, tucking the tool into his coat. He found June and Wren in the thin strip of shade behind the livery, where the air tasted of dust and horse sweat. June offered the canteen to Lydia, who watched from inside the bars, cautious as a wild thing cornered too long. Boone crouched to eye level with his girls. You two stay put, watch each other. If I'm not back before sundown, you ride for Mrs. Graves' place and wait. June's chin jutted out stubborn. Are you going to help her? Boone didn't answer. He just ruffled her hair and stood. His boots made almost no sound as he crossed back to the square, hacksaw under his arm. The cage sat in shadow now, iron cooling but no comfort for the woman within. He knelt beside the bars, held out a battered tin cup, the cockman's on, chipped and old, but clean. Drink, he said quietly. Lydia took the cup in both hands, fingers shaking just once, then steady. She drank deep, swallowing like it hurt. She handed it back without a word, but her eyes held his, searching for the price of mercy. As Boone slipped the saw teeth onto the padlock, he heard boots crunch behind him. Put that saw down, son. The words were gentle, but the voice was law. Sheriff Macklin Poe stood at Boone's shoulder, hand loose at his hip. His badge was tarnished, but his eyes were sharp, squinting into the sun. You're making this hard on everybody. Boone didn't move. Maybe things ought to be hard. Sheriff shook his head, sighing like a tired father. She don't belong to nobody, Boone, but you break her out, you cross a line can't be uncrossed. Lydia, still gripping the cup, whispered hoarsely, "You don't have to do this." Boone looked at her, voice low, steady as bedrock. "I ain't leaving you here." Sheriff's shadow fell long across the cage. For a moment the world narrowed to three people, a lock, and the unblinking gaze of the town. Boone's hand stayed on the saw, waiting. "I ain't the law you need, Calder," Poe muttered, then turned away. "But I won't be the one to stop you, neither." The square was empty now. The only sound was Boone's breath, Lydia's heart beating hard enough to shake her bones, the wind in the cottonwoods, and the promise Boone made without saying, "I will not leave you behind." The sun dipped lower, painting the bars gold. Boone pressed the hacksaw to the lock and began to cut, slow and certain, as the first shadow of evening crawled across the desert floor. Dusk bled across the prairie, spilling long shadows from every porch and rooftop in Mesquite Crossing. The wind changed, bringing with it the bite of sage and the metallic tang of fear. In the center of town, Boone Calder knelt beside the iron cage, his hand steady on the hacksaw, teeth biting slow and relentless through the padlock's neck. A crowd was forming again, drawn by the rasp of metal and the knowledge that the old rules were about to break. Whit Barnes lingered on the mercantile steps, his smile gone. A few church elders muttered near the water trough. June and Wren watched wide-eyed from beneath the canvas of the wagon, holding each other's hands tight enough to hurt. Boone kept sawing, the world narrowed to the task, sweat tracing a line down his jaw. He could feel the eyes on his back. Lydia sat still inside, knuckles bone white, lips pressed thin, but there was a spark behind her gaze now, a quiet question. Would someone really risk everything, just for her? Sheriff Macklin Poe stepped into the ring of lantern light. He moved slow, hat in hand, lines deep around his mouth. "Boone," he said, voice grave, "you open that cage. You're starting trouble with the Thorns and the town council. They'll see it as you choosing her side over your own." Boone's answer was as steady as the setting sun. "Then I guess I'm on her side." The padlock clattered to the dirt. Boone rose and swung the cage door open. For a breath, nobody moved. Then Lydia stood, legs trembling but unbowed. Boone reached a hand to steady her. She hesitated, then took it. A wave of unrest rolled through the onlookers, men shifting, women murmuring. A boy spat in the dust and looked away. Whit Barnes stepped forward, blocking Boone's path, shoulders squared. "You're making a mistake, Calder. We got rules. If you walk her out, you're against us all." June, trembling, slipped from the wagon and stood, small and unafraid, between Lydia and the crowd. "She ain't done nothing wrong," she said, voice sharp as winter. Sheriff Poe's eyes flickered over the two girls, then back to Boone and Lydia. A long silence stretched, the kind that weighs heavier than any gun. "Go," the sheriff said at last, his voice rough, "and don't make me regret it." Boone led Lydia and the girls towards the wagon. The crowd parted, some with anger, some with shame. Nobody offered help. Nobody raised a hand to stop them, either. As they passed the edge of the square, a gust of wind picked up the red dirt, swirling it around their feet. The key from the cage, dropped in haste, glinted in the gutter, already half buried. Lydia's steps grew surer with every stride, her shoulders drawing back, her eyes beginning to see the horizon instead of the bars. Boone hoisted June and Wren into the wagon, helped Lydia up, then climbed to the driver's seat. He flicked the reins, and the old buckboard lurched forward, away from the eyes, the rules, the shame of Mesquite Crossing. But as they turned onto the trail leading out of town, Boone spotted something wedged in the spokes of his front wheel. A black sealed letter, stamped with the mark of a crow. He tucked it away without a word, the threat unspoken but heavy in his pocket. "Law don't make a man right," Boone muttered almost to himself. "Just makes it easy to tie a knot around someone's neck." The sky above them burned purple, and as they rode into the gathering dark, the first star blinked to life, a quiet witness to lines crossed and the price that waits for any soul who dare to set another free. Nightfall in the desert country comes all at once. One minute there's a molten line of sun burning the grass tops gold. The next, it's cold, shadows stretched thin and long as lies. Boone Calder drove the buckboard away from Mesquite Crossing, not looking back. The world behind him was nothing but dust and the soft hush of judgment carried on the wind. They camped that night near Dry Arrow Wash, in a hollow where the sage grew thick and the coyotes' yipping sounded far enough to be harmless. Boone built a small fire, kept it low, mindful of watchers, his back always to the open dark. June and Wren sat close by, boots off, feet to the embers, their voices small and tired. Boone cooked corn cakes on a skillet, the scent of browned flour drifting over them like a prayer. Lydia sat apart, wrapped in Boone's old blanket, eyes tracing the firelight across her hands. The bruises on her wrists looked darker by flame, but she didn't hide them. She hadn't said a word since the cage. Not a plea, not a thank you. Boone respected the silence. When the food was ready, he handed her the battered blue enamel cup, a piece of his own past, chipped from years of use. She took it, careful, and drank. Her lips pressed to the rim like it hurt to touch something that belonged to anyone. Boone ate with his head down, chewing slow, watching her from under his hat brim. "Ain't much, but it'll fill a belly." Lydia looked at him then, her eyes not soft, not angry, just flat as the prairie in drought. "I can't bear children." Her voice was quiet, cut out of stone. "That's why." Boone didn't answer, didn't offer pity or easy words. He tossed another corn cake to June, handed Wren the canteen. "You girls get some sleep. We ride early." Night thickened around them, the fire burning blue-white at the edges. Lydia pulled the blanket tighter, staring into the flames. Boone sat nearby, gun across his knees, gaze scanning the darkness. Far off, a whistle, high, cutting, echoed through the wash. Boone tensed, hand tightening on his rifle. He nudged out the fire with his boot, ash scattering like old bones. "Somebody's out there," he murmured, mostly to himself. He packed up the remains of supper, motioned for the girls to climb under the wagon, made a bed for them of old coats and dry grass. Lydia stayed above ground, sitting on the far side of the fire ring. Boone handed her the blue cup again, filled now with water instead of coffee. "You sleep here," he said, voice low. "I'll keep watch." She accepted the cup, her hand trembling only once. "You shouldn't have helped me," she whispered. "They'll come for you." Boone shrugged, poking at the ashes with a stick. "Let them come." Wind shifted, bringing the smell of distant smoke, not from their fire, but from someone else's, close enough to make a man nervous, far enough that only Boone noticed. Later, as the moon climbed, Lydia tucked the blanket around June and Wren, laying a gentle hand on each girl's brow. The girls slept deep, trust given to Boone's shadow on the ground and the woman's soft hush. Dawn was thin and sharp. Boone found tracks, a third horse, fresh. Near them, a spent. 44 casing gleamed in the red dirt, dropped in the night by hands unseen. He stood for a long while, holding the shell in his palm, feeling its weight. Then he looked back at Lydia, who watched him with eyes that had dared him to regret anything. From that moment, Boone spoke only one promise. "From now on, no one lays a hand on you unless they go through me first." He dropped the casing, kicked dust over it and began saddling up. The world had shifted in the night, and Boone Calder would not run from the fight that was coming. The road back to Calder's Cut was little more than a pair of wagon ruts winding through tumbleweed and stone, but it was the closest thing Boone Calder had to sanctuary. They rode in silence for most of the morning. June and Wren curled in the wagon bed, Lydia perched on a pile of feed sacks, blankets still wrapped tight around her shoulders. The hush was thick, but not empty. Even a hard land knows how to cradle what's been wounded. As they crested the last rise, the ranch came into view. A lone cabin, weathered gray, with a broken rail fence snaking out toward the dry creek. Over the porch hung an old lantern, a hurricane lamp, soot-streaked, glass chipped, but still burning with a stubborn flame. This was home, if anywhere was. Boone set the brake and helped the girls down, then offered Lydia his hand. She hesitated, searching his face for the price, but took it anyway. The wind tugged her hair across her eyes. She looked at the place like a stray might look at an open door. Inside, the air was cool and close. June ran straight to the old wood stove, dragging Wren behind her. Boone set about fixing the window latch, moving with the restless energy of a man who can't let his hands go idle. Lydia stood in the doorway, arms crossed, gaze drifting over the battered table, the row of jars on the shelf, the pair of boots by the door, not hers, but not his either, lost to time and someone he never spoke of. A gentle knock sounded at the porch rail. 3 quick taps. Boone looked up, eyes narrowing. He answered with 3 knocks of his own, the code his father had taught him years before. 3 knocks means home. The door opened to Mercy Ortega, the midwife. She was short, thick-waisted, hair shot with silver, and moved like a woman who'd seen both ends of the world. She held a cloth bag full of roots and old recipes. "Heard the wind carried trouble to your yard," Mercy said, eyes flicking from Boone to Lydia. "Figured you might need more than luck." She pressed a pouch of herbs into Lydia's palm, fingers squeezing. "For pain, for sleep." Lydia whispered thanks, voice hoarse with gratitude she couldn't quite shape. June, watching, asked, "Is she staying here, Daddy?" Boone met Mercy's gaze, then his daughter's. "She is, for as long as she needs." The sun was low by the time Boone found it. The letter pressed under the front door, sealed black, a crude crow stamped in wax. He broke it open, lips pressed tight as he read, "Bring the Baron back or pay in blood. C. Thorne." He didn't tell Lydia what it said. He just folded it, tucked it into the back of the old Bible on the shelf. That night, Lydia sat on the floor by the fire, sewing up a rip in June's sleeve, her hands slow and careful. The lamp on the table flickered, painting her face in golden lines. Outside, Boone checked the fence, eyes drawn to the far edge of the land where the wild grass met the sky. He caught sight of a figure there, tall, broad-shouldered, standing just beyond the reach of the dying light. A whistle drifted on the wind, soft and sharp. "Little bird." Boone watched, rifle loose in his hands, until the figure vanished into the darkness. When he came inside, Lydia was still at the fire, June asleep against her side. She looked up, voice low, "He'll burn it all, just to see me ruined." Boone knelt beside her, the flames shining in his eyes. "Let him try. I'll water the ground with courage before I give up a thing that matters." For the first time, Lydia didn't look away. The night air at Calder's Cut was thin as a blade, sharpening every sound. Boone locked the doors, bolted the shutters, checked the rifle's chamber twice. Lydia tucked the girls into bed, pulling the quilt up beneath their chins, singing a lullaby so soft it barely reached the corners of the room. Mercy had left just before sundown, leaving behind a jar of willow bark and a look that said she'd be back if she was needed. Midnight brought the hour when only dogs and men with dark hearts walk the earth. 3 hard knocks rattled the door, sharp, urgent, wrong. Boone didn't answer. Instead, he called through the thick plank, "State your name or keep moving." A familiar drawl answered from the porch. "Caleb Thorne, come to collect what's mine." Boone set his jaw, cocked the rifle, and cracked the door just wide enough to show the barrel. "No one here belongs to you." Caleb's boots scraped the step. "She's a return. Broken goods. Law's on my side." Boone's grip tightened. "The law can burn if it don't know right from wrong." A tense silence. Then the click of a pistol outside, echoed by Boone's rifle snapping to his shoulder. Caleb's voice oiled through the gap. "Don't make this hard, Calder. It's a woman. Just a woman." Boone's words were low and sure. "That's the difference between us." From the window June watched, eyes wide. Lydia gathered both girls under the kitchen table, pressing a finger to her lips. She reached up, and with 3 steady knocks on the wood above, "Ba nipla na," she reminded them, "This is where we stay safe." Outside, boots shuffled. A shot cracked through the dark, splitting the night. Boone fired back, aiming high, hat off, not blood. Caleb's men scattered, cursing. Another shadow at the edge of the yard. The sheriff, Macklin Poe, silhouetted against the moon, badge catching stray light. But Poe didn't come closer, just watched, arms crossed, hat pulled low. Inside, Lydia hugged June and Wren tight, heart thundering against their small backs. The lamp on the table shook, throwing wild shadows over the walls. Boone stayed by the door, silent and waiting, breath measured, eyes fixed on the next move. At last, the footsteps retreated, gravel crunching under angry boots. Caleb's voice floated through the night, bitter and promising. "You ain't seen the last of this. My brother will settle it, one way or another." Boone let the rifle drop, let out a breath he'd held too long. He closed the door, checked the lock, and pressed his forehead to the cool wood. From the dark, Lydia's whisper came steady. "I'm not worth this trouble." Boone turned, kneeling in the faint light. "I decide what's worth it. I ain't leaving." Outside, the wind carried the howl of a distant dog. Warning, morning, or maybe just another voice that refused to give up the fight. Dawn broke slow over Calder's cut. The sky washed pale as if the world itself was holding its breath. Boone was already up, circling the yard, checking fence posts for cuts and footprints, fingers running over old scars in the wood. The land felt tense, every fence rail, every clump of buffalo grass waiting for a storm. He found it by the gate, a letter pinned with a knife, the wax seal pressed deep in black, the crude outline of a crow. Lydia saw it from the window and froze, the blue cup she'd been rinsing clattering to the basin. She wrapped her arms around herself, gaze distant. Boone opened the letter, lips moving soundless as he read the threat. Legal words twisted sharp, the hand of Silas Thorne, Caleb's older brother. Silas was not a brute like Caleb, but a thinker, a man who hid poison behind scripture and signatures. It wasn't just a warning, it was a lawsuit. Unlawful harboring, slander, a warrant signed by the county judge. Boone spat in the dirt, folding the letter tight. By midday, the ranch felt smaller, the horizon closing in. Whit Barnes from the Mercantile came up the trail, eyes averted, hat in hand. He stammered apologies, delivered a summons, and left without a word about the woman in the cage. The price of a rule broken. That afternoon, as Lydia patched June's dress by the window, the sharp sound of hooves cut the hush. Boone looked out and saw an old friend, Jeb Stark, his riding coat sun-bleached, face lined from too many hard years. Jeb dismounted slow, tipping his hat. "Heard troubles come knocking, Boone. You got friends, but you got debts, too." Inside, Mercy Ortega washed her hands at the basin, keeping one eye on Lydia, who tried to act calm but couldn't hide the tremor in her fingers. Mercy spoke low. "There are men who'll pay for trouble and men who'll sell it. Best you know which is which." Jeb sat with Boone on the porch. They spoke little, letting the wind fill in the things words couldn't. At last, Jeb said, "Silas sent for me. Promised to clear my debts if I talked you down. I won't do it, but you should know. They're coming legal, not just with guns." Boone nodded, eyes on the horizon. "I figured." In the kitchen, Lydia washed the blue cup, careful, precise, then set it upside down on the shelf. A small act, but it was the first sign she was claiming this place as her own, even if her hands shook while she did it. That evening, a figure appeared at the edge of the drive. Silas Thorne, alone, dressed in dark Sunday clothes, a thin smile on his lips. He didn't come close, just stood watching as if measuring the worth of every nail in Boone's house. Silas called out, voice smooth as riverstone, "Law's on my side, cowboy. Might as well let her go." Boone met his eyes, voice flat. "Winds change. So do sides." The day slipped toward dusk, carrying Silas's threat with it. In the calm before dark, Boone checked every door, every window, then sat with his girls and Lydia, listening to the quiet. He didn't trust the peace, but he would hold the line, no matter who claimed the law. The days grew longer, but the air inside Calder's Cut turned colder. In Mesquite Crossing, word traveled quick as prairie fire, about the outlaw rancher, about the barren woman, about the trouble brewing at the edge of town. Neighbors stopped waving from their wagons. Doors shut a little faster. Boone felt the shift with every trip to the mercantile, every glance that slid off him like a warning. He tried to shield the girls from it, but June was sharp, and Wren drew the meanness in the dust outside the porch. Lydia kept to herself, mending, baking, sweeping the floors, with the care that spoke more of nerves than pride. Sunday, Boone brought Lydia and the girls to Cedar Chapel. The pews were packed, but as they entered, the space around them seemed to widen, a silent moat nobody dared cross. The preacher, Abner Klein, gave a weak smile, but his eyes drifted to the Thorne elders in the front row. Lydia sat rigid, hands folded, jaw set. After the service, Boone asked the preacher for help, a safe place just for a night. Klein stammered about rules, about donations, about not wanting trouble. Mercy Ortega stepped in, voice like a hammer. "If the Lord's too busy, let the women keep watch." She opened her own home for Lydia, risking gossip, risking all. Lydia began helping Mercy with births. In secret, her touch gentle, her voice soft. She made herself useful, one small kindness at a time, braiding hair, tending fevers, baking bread that filled the house with warmth. But trouble kept brewing. At the next council meeting, Silas Thorne stood tall and calm, papers in hand, and called for a new ordinance. No midwife without county license. His voice carried and his money moved hearts. The motion passed. Mercy's door became a target. One night, Lydia tied a handkerchief around Wren's neck, teaching her a simple knot. If it comes loose, you tie it again. Never let it fall. But the real storm broke when the community barn caught fire. Flames lit the night sky, and folks rushed from every house to form a bucket line. When it was done, when the embers cooled and the grain lay ruined, whispers turned into pointed fingers. "Bad luck," they said. It followed her here. Boone stood at the edge of the crowd, his girls clinging to his legs, Lydia at his side, silent as always. Whit Barnes, face pale and drawn, spoke loud for all to hear. Sometimes the land needs cleansing. Some folks just bring the storm. Boone looked down at June, her small face pale in the firelight. He bent low and spoke so only she could hear. "We hold." That night, Boone locked the doors, checked the lamp, and watched the sky for more trouble. He didn't believe in curses, but he knew what it was to be the first blamed and the last forgiven. Inside, the hurricane lamp finally flickered out, leaving them in Darkness, but together, holding tight to the only home they had left. Wind rattled the cottonwoods, shaking dry leaves loose and scattering them across the trail west of Mesquite Crossing. Boone Calder moved quickly, loading sacks and blankets into the buckboard, face set, jaw working hard against the words he wouldn't say in front of his girls. He'd seen too much suspicion in town. Too many doors closing, too many whispers behind hands. He made a plan. Jeb Stark, his old friend, would take June and Wren by a back trail through Windmill Gulch, promising to deliver them safe to Boone's Aunt May over at the far ranch. Boone and Lydia would follow, hoping to meet at the old windmill by sundown. The ride out was tense. June sat stiff beside Wren, hands folded in her lap, every bump in the road another mile between her and home. Boone tried to keep his eyes ahead, but something in the land felt wrong, the air too still, the birds too quiet. At Windmill Gulch, the windmill's arms spun slow, creaking in the afternoon breeze. Boone reached the crossing just as Jeb rode out of the draw, the girls bundled in a wagon with quilts up to their chins. For a moment, Boone felt relief. But then he saw it, tracks in the dust, not just Jeb's, but another set, heavier boots, a horse that wasn't familiar. His heart sank. He found Jeb waiting under the shadow of the blades, hat in hand, sweat gleaming at his temples. "You got 'em safe?" Boone asked, voice tight. Jeb hesitated, then broke, voice shaking. "I did what I had to, Boone. I owed Silas money. He said he'd wipe my debt clean if I told him which way you were heading. I didn't want to, I swear it." Boone's fists clenched, the urge to swing nearly blinding, but he saw Jeb's shame, the misery in his stance. Instead of violence, Boone let the silence hang between them, then said softly, "You had a choice. You still do." A shout rang out across the gulch. Riders, at least a half-dozen, barreling down the cut, with rifles glinting in the sun. Silas Thorne's men, faces grim, eyes hard as flint. Lydia drew June and Wren close, the girls clutching her arms, hearts thudding against her sides. Jeb trembled. "I'm sorry, Boone. I'll help however I can. I'm done with that family." Boone didn't answer. He grabbed June and Wren, shoving them toward Lydia, and pulled his own rifle from the wagon. "Find cover!" he barked. The windmill's old timbers became a barricade as bullets splintered the air, dirt spitting up at their feet. In the chaos, the old rusty key, Jeb's keepsake from town, a symbol of debts never paid, tumbled from his pocket, landing in the dust at Boone's boots. Boone snatched it up, shoving it deep into his coat, a bitter reminder of what trust can cost. The riders circled, their horses churning the earth. But Boone held his ground, answering gunfire with measured shots, never wasting a round. Jeb crawled to his side, rifle shaking, and together they pushed back until the riders, spooked or out of heart, turned tail and vanished into the wild. As the smoke cleared and the windmill creaked overhead, Boone looked at Jeb. Broken, weeping, he offered a hand, not in friendship, but in the hard grace of a man who's seen too many good folks ruined by bad choices. "There's still a way out, Jeb," Boone said, voice rough. "Stand on the right side." The girls wept in Lydia's arms. Boone wrapped them all in his coat, pulling them close, heart pounding with fear and something like hope. But even as peace settled, the sound of distant hooves warned Boone that safety was only ever borrowed. The fight wasn't done. The land had taken its price, and it was hungry for more. Night settled heavy over Calder's Cut, moonlight catching on broken rails and the jagged teeth of burned-out brush. Boone had barely slept since the skirmish at Windmill Gulch, his rifle never out of reach, boots beside his bed, every muscle tight and waiting for the next blow. It came just before dawn. The smell hit first, smoke, sweet and thick, rolling in across the low ground. Boone jerked awake, sprinted for the door, heart pounding. Out by the north fence, orange and blue light licked skyward. flames devouring cedar posts, the heat fierce even from 100 paces off. He ran for the bucket, yelling for Lydia to keep the girls back. June and Wren watched from the cabin window, faces ghostly in the fire's glow. Lydia stood behind them, one arm stretched wide to block the door, knuckles white against the frame. Boone and Jeb, both half-dressed, fought the blaze with shovels and buckets, back and forth, water hissing, boots sinking in black mud. But the fire moved too quick. When it finally died, only charred earth and twisted wire remained. Boone slumped, shoulders heaving, watching smoke drift into a pale morning. Near the gate hung a sign, hastily painted, letters red as blood, property in dispute. Above it a battered badge, the sheriff's, laid on the step like a surrender. Macklin Poe stood nearby, hat in hand, eyes full of sorrow. "I came too late," Poe muttered. "They wanted me to pick a side. Law's got no teeth when the money's on the other end." He placed the badge at Boone's feet. "I ain't the law you need." He turned and walked away, the lines in his back deep as river canyons. Inside, Lydia soothed the girls, her own hands trembling as she wiped ashes from June's cheek. She bent to the floor, found a blackened horseshoe among the debris, slipped it quietly into her pocket, a talisman or a curse she couldn't decide. Boone gathered what was left, a few blankets, a sack of beans. The old hurricane lamp now cracked it sooty. He knocked 3 times on the doorframe, 3 knocks for home. June and Wren, cheeks streaked with tears, knocked 3 times back from the wagon, voices small but sure. "We're here, Daddy." As Boone loaded his family into the buckboard, Jeb limped to his side, offering his arm in silent apology. They shared a look. Old friendship, battered but not dead. Lydia stood in the wagon, holding June and Wren close, her eyes shining, not with fear, but with something harder, colder, resolve. A courier galloped in, throwing dust and a folded paper at Boone's feet. It was a court order, stamped by the Santa Loma County judge, temporary suspension of Boone's guardianship. Silas Thorne's signature glared up from the page. Lydia looked at the paper, voice quiet. "Let me go to them. If I turn myself in, maybe they'll leave you and the girls alone." Boone's face was stone. "Number, they want you to break me, not to save you. They'll use you for leverage. I won't let it happen." Lydia swallowed hard, fighting tears. She pressed the horseshoe deep into her pocket, the iron still warm from the fire. Boone gripped her shoulder, steady and unyielding. "We hold together." He set the hurricane lamp on the wagon seat, cracked glass and all. A stubborn light, refusing to die. With a last look at the ranch, blackened and empty, Boone snapped the reins. The buckboard rolled out over the ashes, 3 knocks echoing on the old wood gate behind them. A cold wind barreled down from the northern ridges, cutting through coats and resolve alike. Boone drove the buckboard hard, away from Calder's Cut, away from the charred fence lines and the ruined name that clung to him like soot. The world behind was burned. Only forward, maybe, there was a place left to claim. They reached Yarrow Fork at dusk. The river ran high, icy from spring melt, black with hidden stones. Boone eyed the crossing, jaw tight. "No going back now," he murmured, mostly to himself. The girls huddled in the wagon bed, arms wrapped around each other. Lydia sat in front, hands knotted in her skirt, eyes on the horizon. Boone checked the rig, one old rope fraying at the hames, another at the rear. He told June, "You remember that knot your mama taught you?" June nodded, lips pressed thin. "Show Wren, just in case." He handed her the loose end. June's small fingers tied the simple knot Lydia had shown her days before, hands shaking but sure. Rain started, first a whisper, then a lash. Boone led the team into the river, water churning at their knees, wheels biting for grip. The current pulled hard. "Hold on!" Boone shouted, voice cracking over the roar. Midway across, the left wheel jammed against a boulder. The buckboard jerked, pitched sideways. Lydia reached for the girls, June yelling, "Don't let go!" Boone dropped into the freezing water, boots sucked down in the mud, fighting to free the axle. His shoulder screamed where the rope burned his skin, but he wouldn't quit. Suddenly, gunshots echoing over the rain. Across the far bank, Silas Thorne and two riders waited, rifles raised, eyes white in the gloom. A bullet splintered the wagon's rail, showering Lydia with sharp, wet wood. "Down!" Boone yelled. He grabbed the rope, used June's knot, and lashed it tight around the broken frame. Lydia pulled the girls low, shielding them with her body. Boone pushed, the river nearly taking him under, but the wagon lurched free. Another shot, this one grazing Boone's shoulder, tearing cloth and flesh. He staggered, teeth clenched against the pain. Lydia, eyes wild, scrambled to her feet, tore a strip from her dress, and pressed it against the wound, hands steady now. From the trees, another wagon appeared. Mercy Ortega, driving her battered old rig, white scarf flapping at her throat. She wheeled her mule team between Silas and Boone, blocking the rifles. "Get in!" she hollered. Boone heaved Lydia and the girls into Mercy's wagon, Jeb scrambling up behind. The rain fell harder, drowning gunfire and cries. They raced for Mercy's almond orchard, safe, at least for a moment, under the low-hung branches. Inside the shed, Lydia bandaged Boone's wound, her hands stained red, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He caught her wrist, holding it tight. "If I fall," he whispered, "you lead them. And don't you ever leave." Outside, the storm raged. But inside, in the lamplight, family held hard against every curse the world could throw. Clouds broke at dawn, washing Mercy Ortega's orchard in cold blue light. The almond trees stood bare and silent, their white blossoms gone, limbs rattling like bones in the wind. Boone lay on a cot near the fire, shoulders stiff and bandaged, his jaw clenched against pain. Lydia sat nearby, spoon-feeding broth to Wren, while June curled against her side, hair tangled, eyes fixed on the door. Word spread fast. Silas Thorne was coming with a posse, lawyers and the county judge. Mercy gathered every woman Lydia had ever helped, mothers, grandmothers, girls not yet grown, and they stood shoulder to shoulder at the farm gate, blocking the road. Arms folded and faces set. At midday, the sound of hooves thundered through Cottonwood Pass. Silas rode at the front, lawyer beside him, guns bristling behind. The judge's carriage rolled up last, fine curtains drawn. Silas called out, "Bring out Lydia Hale and the children. By law, they're not yours to keep." Mercy stepped forward, chin lifted. "Law's a rope, mister. Depends who's holding." The judge read out the order. Guardian rights suspended. Lydia to be surrendered, children taken as wards of the county. Boone, teeth gritted, stood tall beside Lydia and the girls. "No one's taking my family," he said, voice cracked but clear. Jeb Stark limped up from the barn, a white rag tied to his rifle, his way of choosing. "I'm with Boone," he called, voice raw. Tension cracked the air. Silas's men lifted their rifles, eyes darting. Sheriff Poe, badge pinned back to his chest, rode up the middle, throwing himself between the lines. "Guns down, all of you! Not one more shot in my town!" His voice boomed off the rocks, shaking dust from the hills. But Silas was past reason. He shoved the judge aside and fired, a wild shot, missing Boone by inches. In the confusion, Mercy's women formed a wall, refusing to yield. Lydia pressed June and Wren behind her, face pale but steady. Boone leveled his own rifle, heart pounding. A volley rang out. Boone's bullet clipped Silas's hat, knocking him to the ground. Jeb dropped another gunman with a warning shot. Lydia, hands steady, fired low. Her bullet struck the dirt at Silas's boots, forcing him to stumble back, eyes wide with fear for the first time. Then silence. The only sound the wind through the cottonwoods, Mercy whispering a prayer. Sheriff Poe holstered his pistol, jaw tight. Enough blood. The law's been twisted too long. Defeated, Silas struggled to his feet, face blotched with rage. He spat on the ground, then threw a folded writ at Boone's boots, a new court order, higher than the county, signed by a judge 3 towns over. You may have won today, Calder, but this ain't over. As Silas retreated, Lydia reached for Boone, her hand finding his in the dust. Wren knocked 3 times on the orchard gate, 3 slow, steady taps, echoing in the bay. Hush. Boone squeezed Lydia's hand, voice hoarse but unbroken. We stand, we hold, and I ain't leaving. Night fell on Cottonwood Pass, but for the first time in months, the stars seemed to burn a little brighter. Hope, hard-won and fragile, but alive. Days passed, the orchard settling into a tense calm. Boone worked the fence line with Jeb Stark, mending what the fire and bullets had ruined. For the first time since the trouble began, the land felt almost peaceful. Each post set in place, each wire pulled tight, a promise that life could be made whole again. In town, Sheriff Poe took up his badge for good, walking the dusty streets with a new weight in his step. He called a meeting of the council, laid bare the crooked ordinances Silas Thorne had snuck past trembling hands. Whit Barnes, shame in every line of his face, stood and apologized, first to Boone, then to Lydia, and then to every woman who'd been turned away for not fitting what men thought a wife should be. Mercy Ortega's little house on the edge of town became an official birthing place. Lydia signed her name, Hale, in a firm black script, as the midwife for Mesquite Crossing. Mothers came with new hope. Children born in her arms now wore ribbons Lydia herself had sewn. Jeb finished the last post at Boone's new fence, wiping sweat from his brow, hands blistered but proud. He turned himself in for what he'd done, selling Boone out to Silas. Poe gave him a sentence of hard labor. Mend what you broke, then you're free. The 2 men worked side by side, wordless most days, but Jeb's silence was a kind that mends, not one that hides. One quiet evening, a final letter came, this time for Lydia, her name written in a hand she recognized too well. Inside, Silas's words slithered. See you soon, little bird. Lydia shivered but did not run. On the porch, Boone sat sharpening a small carving knife. His late wife's initials faded on the handle, the blade gleaming under the setting sun. Lydia set the old blue enamel cup beside him and tightened the new glass on the hurricane lamp, twisting it so the wind could never blow it out. Behind the door, the frayed reins hung, replaced now, but the old leather kept as a lesson. Some wounds leave their mark, but don't have to chain a person down. Boone looked over at Lydia. Not a man on one knee, not a hero with a ring, just a rancher with scars trying to build something that lasts. His words were simple, steady as a fence post. Stay. Be their mother. Be my wife, if you want it. Lydia didn't answer with words. Instead, she leaned against the post, knocked 3 times, firm, soft, certain, 3 knocks for home. Inside, June and Wren drew hearts on the dusty floor, laughter mixing with the soft hush of a new beginning. The past wasn't forgotten. Silas's shadow still drifted along the far fence line. But in this light, in this hush, family was forged not from blood or law, the will to hold on. Summer ripened across Glenshire Flats, the grass tall and green, lavender spilling purple down the slope to the creek. The sign over the gate read 3 Tap Ranch, letters scorched deep into cedar, a mark of something finally theirs. On the porch, Lydia. Hale set a cooling apple pie on the battered table, her hands still small, still scarred, but sure in the motion. Inside, the house echoed with the footsteps and laughter of June and Wren, no longer shadows, no longer wary. Their bare feet pattered across the smooth boards as they carried handfuls of wildflowers for the kitchen jar. Boone watched from the doorway, arms folded, sun catching in the dust that floated through the open window. He smiled, lines around his eyes deepening, a tired man finally at ease. At the edge of the yard, Sheriff Poe lifted his hat in greeting. "Smells like a holiday," he said, voice gruff with affection. Lydia laughed, soft, open, the sound of a door finally unlocked. Mercy Ortega stopped by, dropping off a basket of eggs, her voice low and kind. "Got a full house now, Boone. Looks like you did something right." The old blue enamel cup gleamed on the kitchen shelf, washed and ready for whoever needed water or comfort. The hurricane lamp, glass new and bright, hung silent on its hook above the door. By the gate, Boone's worn leather reins, frayed but cleaned, a memory hung like a badge, reminded him where he'd been and what he'd refused to let break. Evenings, Boone read aloud from the Psalms, not preaching, just grounding the house in quiet and memory. Lydia brought pie and coffee to the table, June and Wren's giggles mixing with the rustle of the cottonwoods. Sometimes, when the light was just right, they would gather on the porch and knock 3 times on the railing. Boone would answer, 3 slow knocks in reply, 3 knocks for home. Neighbors talked about the woman who'd once been caged, about the rancher who never left her behind. Folks sent for Lydia when their wives or daughters labored. Men who had once crossed the street now nodded at Boone in the general store. One day a letter arrived. No signature, only a pressed crow in black wax. Boone burned it in the stove without reading. Some shadows never left, but the house stood strong against them. That evening, as fireflies blinked along the fence, Lydia leaned into Boone's side, her head resting on his shoulder. "You know, I never thought a man would keep his word this long." Boone smiled, hand warm over hers. "I told you, I ain't leaving." Inside, the girls knocked 3 times on the table, their voices bright as bells. Boone knocked back, the sound echoing through the old wood and out into the night. Home wasn't a place, he thought. It was a promise kept in every knock, every meal, every night survived. It was the battered blue cup, the lamp burning through storm and darkness, the rough touch of a hand that would never let go. And when morning came, with its dust and honeyed light, the world might still whisper of old feuds and harder times. But at Three Tap Ranch, love was the law, and the only thing stronger than fear was the quiet, steady certainty of those who refuse to walk away. If this story touched you, drop a simple 0 or 1 down in the comments so I know you're out there. Tell me, what would you have done out there in the dust and heat? Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more Wild West tales like this one. Stick around, there's plenty more stories waiting just over the next ridge.